Hello, I'm Robert, and wish you all a very Merry Christmas and hope and do keep safe, everyone, and be careful of the Omicron variant. And I thought I'd talk about the uh, a bit further ahead. What the World Health Organization sees coming later on. It's like there's hairpin bends on the way, and it's very hard to see around the bend to what's coming next. But the advances in science really do show that we can end this in 2022. We can be at the end of this pandemic. And so, as you go through all being so careful yet again, and we may end up with some areas in lockdown if it really surges very high, but it'll be a much more intelligent lockdown this time because they know which things you need to close down, mainly hospitality and large gatherings, if they do have to do that. And they and we all know how to be more careful. We've been through this before, and then there is the end of the tunnel coming in sight. So this is to encourage you, to give you kind of strength to keep going through what may possibly be another series of maybe some restricted measures, and certainly we all need to be more careful for the next few weeks. But it's an amazing vaccines coming on their way, and this is the World Health Organization say this is the year to end the pandemic, and they're talking as informed experts. We got so much hopium from the politicians, over the last year saying, oh, it's going to be just mild like a flu, or it's just going to go away by itself. It's going to become mild. The World Health Organization don't say it's going to become mild by itself. We can't say that. It can go either way, but we can make it mild. We can end it. And we will end it. And we can end it very fast. We can end it in 2022. We already have all the tools to take out the severe spectrum if we get enough vaccine to enough people. And we have much better vaccines on the way, both spectrum vaccines and better therapeutics as well, better drugs. That's all coming. So, and there's a big World Health Organization solidarity trial for the vaccines. And so the wealthy economies, and I know there's a huge amount of funding in 2020, in billions and billions of dollars, and Operation Warp Speed, and it's not just the United States. United Kingdom put in lots of funding, Germany put in lots of funding, many countries. It wasn't just the United States, and China did as well, of course, and everyone did it in 2020. But now we come to the end of 2021. It's mainly the World Health Organization, and the other countries are mainly focusing on buying lots and lots of Pfizer and looking at how many boosters you can of Pfizer to get as protected as possible. But the World Health Organization, they're looking further ahead, and the weaker economies, and they are also funding these new vaccines too, for a different reason, because the wealthy economies are just not giving them enough vaccine, and not transferring the technology that they need to make Pfizer. They're just not giving them the technology either. So Africa, Brazil, Thailand, Turkey, these are some of the countries that are funding the next round of vaccines. And CEPI and the World Health Organization. So that's where the next round is coming from, not from the stronger economies. Although a lot have actually been invented in the stronger economies, but with licenses and agreements with the weaker economies. So that's what's happening now. And there's going to be a big solidarity trial. This is something the World Health Organization wanted to do in 2020. It's much more efficient to do a big trial, just like they did with drugs, for vaccines, where you have lots of them at once. And if you have placebo, you just have one out of maybe 12 groups of people who go, 11 get the vaccine and one gets the placebo. So you've got far fewer placebo people for the number of vaccines. So you can test twice as many vaccines, nearly twice as many vaccines for the same number of people. And then you can compare all the vaccines with each other. And so they're going to be doing that with several of these new vaccine candidates as they come along, and the ones that haven't got trials yet, they're going into this solidarity trial, which has only just started. And then they can bring in a new... So the way it would work is that people who join that trial, they don't know which vaccine they're getting of all the ones, and there'll be maybe, I think there'll be 3 or 4 to start with, and then they build up and maybe be 11 or 12 eventually. So if you register for this trial, you don't know which of those 12 vaccines you'll get. You might get any of those, or you might be a placebo if they're still doing placebo trials. I don't know if they're going to be doing placebos or comparing them with existing vaccines, which is another possibility at this point. And then there'll be, you use the same vaccines in all the places. So for instance, if there's a trial going on in Brazil, another one going on, say, Nigeria, say another one in India, all the vaccines are tested against each other in all these places. So this gives you a very direct comparison, and you don't have all this thing about saying, well, and they all have the same endpoint. They all measure symptomatic disease in exactly the same way for all the vaccines. And if we'd had this already, we'd have a much better idea of which were the best vaccines for which age groups and so on. But with the next generation vaccine, we will have that, at least the ones in this trial. And they are looking for a greater efficacy than the ones we have already, greater protection against the variants of concern, a longer duration of protection. So the ones we have already, then they still have, when they first approved Pfizer, they only had 2 months of data. So they didn't know. It could have been that it was just going to protect you for 2 months. Now we know that it protects you for 6 months at least, and then most people, and we're now having the booster after 6 months, but for Omicron they're doing it earlier, 3 months, in order to have stronger protection against Omicron sooner. But then after the booster starts off quite high, but it'll gradually tail off as well. And I'm thinking that the booster would need to be done again in maybe 8 to 10 months or something like that. We want something better than that for the future. So Pfizer is a first generation vaccine. And you get people thinking, oh, Pfizer's the end. They did everything. That's not true at all. There are various improvements on Pfizer, which they just didn't have time to do when they got the Pfizer vaccine together as quickly as possible. They didn't have the data, and they didn't have the time to do these extra improvements, which have been worked out since then. And so we can definitely do a better vaccine than Pfizer, and it's really a question of how much better it can be. And so that's great efficacy. That's pretty certain that we can get better efficacy than Pfizer, because it was just a first generation vaccine and they did it as quickly as possible. There's more on that, we can do more there. And then greater protection against variants of concern, I'm going to come to that. We can expect to do that. And then longer duration of protection, if you've got a higher efficacy and higher antibodies, and then there's more triggering of the T cells and that all, and the B cells, that gives you longer duration of protection. And then being able to store it. And the Pfizer, as a first generation vaccine, used this 2p tweak. And if you use the hexapod tweak, which makes a more robust spike than the one they were able to make for Pfizer, they can be stored at higher temperatures because it's not going to, because it's more stable. And so the next generation one's going to be able to store in the fridge or even room temperature. And then some can be nasal sprays or tablets, and the various tests of that as well. So all that's going to be going on. So now here's one example. It's Gritstone Bio. Now Gritstone Bio, this has got targeting the killer T cells. And to understand how that works, the 2 stages to when the virus is infecting you. First, it's trying to get into a cell. Then once it's in the cell, it's got to get out to the cell again. It's got to make lots of copies inside that cell, and then it's got to get out again. Now, the antibodies stop the viruses getting into the cells. And that's especially useful right at the beginning when you're first infected. And of course it helps all the way along, but it's especially useful for stopping early on. So it's good at the early stages. And then but once the virus is in the cells and it's multiplying away, then you get the killer T cells, because once the virus is in the cell, that cell is a very clever virus, and basically the COVID virus turns the cells it infects into specialized COVID virus manufacturing factories, and it just snips up everything in the cell that doesn't make COVID viruses. It's got a little marker that it puts on the virus RNA, and then any RNA it finds in the cell that doesn't have that marker on it, it just chops up. And then it blocks the nucleus of the cell to infect, so nothing can come out of it. So it is just the messenger RNA making more virus on the not messenger, the virus RNA replicating itself. It makes its own replication machine as well, because these cells can't replicate RNA normally, and so the virus turns each cell into a specialized virus manufacturing factory, so it's useless to your body at that point. So the T cells then go and kill all these virus factories that the virus has made. And so the idea of the Gridstone vaccine is that it needs the killer T cells. They look for a different thing from the antibodies. Antibodies are looking for the exterior of the virus and what the things it's using to try to get into cells. Whereas the killer T cells, they're looking for the innards of the virus to try and recognize these cells. So they look at the cell and they kind of sniff at the cell and say, oh, that's got a virus factory inside, let's destroy it. So it's a kind of looking for the traces that shows it's a virus factory. And it so happens that the innards of the cell of the virus, that some bits of the innards of the virus, they vary, they hardly vary at all. You look even at completely different coronaviruses, like SARS and COVID, and they look very similar on the innards, although most of the variation is on the outside. So, and then Gridstone Bio, they looked at, they had a recent, I've got a little bit of data there, I think I have. How was it? Oh dear, I didn't include that. Did I? Oh yes, it lost only 3 of 146 T cell epitopes. Those are the things that you have stuck on the vaccine that the T cells learn to recognize in order to destroy the virus making cells. And out of 146, with Omicron, it only lost 3 of them. And they are actually making a new version of the Gridstone Bio that includes the ones that for Omicron as well. So they're actually expanding it to test an Omicron-specific version for the trial in South Africa. So this means that the Gridstone Bio, because it targets the insides of the cells, then it's going to be able to target. There's hardly any dip in the effectiveness at all, probably, of Gridstone Bio. We're using 3 out of 146. It's a very small number of those epitopes that it's going to lose with Omicron. And Omicron was really a very significant variant, far more changes than any of the other ones we've had so far, and it only managed to change 3 of the things on the inside. So this is an example of one's going to be broad spectrum, and because it targets the T cells, it's likely to be long lasting, and it's likely to be, and the T cells means it's likely to be very good at stopping severe disease, because later on, once you've got all these virus factories, then that's what you want. You want to kill those, an effective way of killing those. So if you've got good T cell responses, then it's likely to be quite good. It's likely to be very effective for stopping the severe disease. And they combine it with an antibody section as well. And so that's a second generation vaccine. And it's being funded by CEPI, which is the weaker economies, and well, generally COVAX and CEPI, therefore the entire world. The original idea of COVAX, which was that it was a very clever idea. It was really it was to have a single body that would organize the vaccines for the entire world, for everyone. It would work out just one it would work out the supply chain. So you go and look who can make the syringes, who can make the components, who can make the little bags, the bioreactor bags and so on. And you get this entire thing just working together as one unit throughout the world, that is all going through COVAX. And by doing that, you get far more efficient way of making the vaccines. And then you also have very strong bargaining power, because you've only got because the vaccine manufacturers have got nobody else to play you up against. And instead of that, the wealthy economies, they started doing these bilateral deals with the vaccine manufacturers, which of course bid the price up, which is that's what the World Health Organization was expecting, and that's why they wanted to do COVAX, is to kind of avoid that. And so COVAX would have, if it had actually gone through and been approved in the way it was originally intended, then it would have led to very low cost vaccines. Of course, the vaccine manufacturers still have made billions of dollars, but it wouldn't have been quite such huge amounts as they are earning today. And it would have meant that the entire world would have been vaccinated to the same level at the same time. And we would have produced far more vaccines with such a more efficient way of producing them, and we're sharing the technology with all the countries. So that was the original idea of COVAX, and it was really rather sad that it didn't actually work out, and they just couldn't get everyone to sign it, and then they couldn't get everyone to agree, so they had to weaken it and say, okay, we permit bilateral deals as well as going through COVAX. You can also do bilateral deals if you join COVAX, and then then they got lots of wealthy countries to join COVAX. But then these wealthy countries also did all these bilateral deals, which pushed the prices up. And then the wealthy countries got priority deals with Pfizer and Moderna and J&J and so on, so that all the best vaccines went to them first. And so COVAX then was right at the back of the queue. They had the money to buy the vaccines, but they just couldn't get the batches. And so that's basically what happened. But now with the second generation vaccines, then they're going through COVAX. So it's not that they're going to be only for the weaker economies, because the stronger economies are signed up for COVAX too, but they're going to be just fair with everyone. And so these are so they're going to make it available globally. So Great Stone Bio is going to be made available through COVAX, and then we have these. This is the hexapod tweak. Remember I talked about that. And this is the one that makes the spike proteins more stable, and the immune response stronger, and it's stored at higher temperatures. And then this one, it uses the Newcastle virus, which is a virus of hen's eggs, a virus that can grow in hen's eggs. And this is how we make flu. We make flu vaccines, not flu vaccines. And this hexapod tweak, combined with the Newcastle virus, actually makes 5 times more vaccine per egg than you get in a flu vaccine, but if you make flu vaccines. So it should be even lower cost than flu vaccines. And but again, the wealthy economies have just shown no interest in this. So this is being made by Butanvac. That's in not in Bhutan. That's in Brazil, and it's being made in Thailand and Vietnam and a few other countries, and they are all roughly at the same stage, phase 1. I don't think any of them have quite reached phase 2, but sometime in 2022, and then there's no reason why this wouldn't work. It should work just as well as Pfizer, and if it is, it's probably going to be more effective than Pfizer and much lower cost. And this should be coming along sometime in 2022, so it'll be better than Pfizer and lower cost. So, and then we have Chordogenics. This is a very clever one. I only found out about this recently. This is not going to be injected. It's a nasal spray. And phase 1 was a success. And what this one does, it's really quite strange. They don't really know why it works. I mean, I don't think they know yet. But it's what they discovered. Down to techie details here. Let's go down to techie details here. The thing is that when you've got the virus RNA, And then each amino acid, and then you use that to make proteins. So it goes through the ribosomes to make proteins. So it goes through this kind of translation machine, and it turns it into, and then each set of 3 letters of the virus RNA turns into one amino acid in the next link in the chain of the protein, which gradually grows to be a big protein, which is an enzyme or some other bit of the virus. So what they found out was that if you look at RNA viruses, for some mysterious reason, nobody knows why, it's very rare for the letter G to be followed by letter C of the 3 letters of the RNA code, or for the letter A to be followed by U. They just seem to avoid that. The viruses avoid that. So the thing is that the same amino acid can be coded for by several different 3-letter sequences, the alternative codings for each one. So the RNA viruses avoid the codings that will put a G after the C in the RNA sequence. And nobody knows why that is. But they said, well, we don't know why they do that, but let's try that out. Let's try deliberately putting in lots of G followed by C, and U followed, and A followed, C followed by G. I got it the wrong way around. Let's flip the sequences so that we have lots and lots of C's that go after G, lots of A's that go after U along this sequence, and it makes exactly the same amino acids. So this means it makes exactly the same virus, the same COVID SARS-CoV-2 virus. It makes the same proteins. The RNA is different, but that doesn't make any difference to anything else about the way the virus works. So the virus will still keep on doing all the same things. And what they find if you do that is that the virus replicates at a snail's pace. It just takes ages and ages and ages to make a new copy of the virus. And again, I looked up, I couldn't find any recent papers explaining why that is. So I think it is still a mystery. They don't know why doing this slows down replication of the... So the virus makes its own replication machinery inside the cell. And for some reason, this replication machine that's made by the virus is just very, very slow at copying a C if it's followed by a G, or a U followed by an A. So if you put lots and lots of those along the RNA code, it just goes, it probably goes like that, and it just keeps getting stuck as it tries to decode the RNA to make a copy of it, and to make the enzymes and things. So I'm not sure. I think it's the duplicate replication that it gets stuck on. And I'm not sure. I think maybe the whole thing gets... Anyway, the whole thing is much slower for whatever reason. And so they just basically made a very, very sluggish virus that just sort of goes, just hardly moves at all. And so it's very easy for the body to defeat. And apart from that, it's identical to COVID. And then they infected these volunteers with this very weakened virus. And they did it first of all in quarantine facilities, because just in case they made the calculations wrong and this was actually a worse version of COVID, you wouldn't want it to escape and get into the wild. So they tested it with volunteers, and they found it was indeed very, very slow, and it gave very little by way of symptoms, and easily defeated by their bodies. So this is so the virus will never evolve like this by itself, because it just avoids these. Because this virus, this slowed down virus, attenuated virus, replicates so slowly, and any other virus, and a virus that avoids those sequences will replicate much faster. So there's no way that the live virus will ever evolve to be as mild as this. So this is this is far milder than you could ever get a wild virus to get through slowing down. And so this is a very clever idea. We couldn't have done that years ago, but only modern science makes it possible. The way to actually edit the code with such detail. And so that's really very interesting on the basis of the science, and it's probably it's likely to be quite a pretty effective vaccine. And That's a nasal spray one also, which will help with people who are scared of needles, or for the people who have all these conspiracy theories about needles. And so if you've got nasal spray, they say, oh, that's nasal spray, you can't have a computer chip in a nasal spray or something. And so they'd be all right to spray it in their nose. Anyway, so that's another good one. And then this is another one that I just found out about this very recently. It's the US military. And it's well worth watching this video. If you have a listen to this video, it starts about 9 minutes in, where he talks about the details of the vaccine. And it turns out that one of the main issues in the army is sickness. It's far more important to the soldiers in some ways than other things. It's very, very important. And then the army takes a very long view, so that with COVID, then because they've got so much funding in the US military, then they can take this very long view and say, in the future we may get hit by COVID again, and our soldiers will get sick. And we've got so much funding, let's find a way of vaccinating that, not COVID, but some other coronavirus in the future. So they took a long-term view. They said, well, what can we do to make a vaccine that works not just against COVID, but also against SARS, and also against any other variant that comes in the future? Because they take this long view that if we're in the middle of a battle or we just want to do lots of military exercises, 5 years from now, and we don't want our soldiers to be getting sick with whatever the next pandemic is, if there's another one. So we want to find a vaccine that'll protect them from viruses, from all of these. So they started on that as soon as the pandemic started, and they're now on phase 1 trials. What they've got is a little nanoparticle, and it's a protein subunit virus vaccine. So it actually makes the proteins of the vaccine without any of the mRNA or in it at all, without any of the RNA, without any genetic code, just the protein of the vaccine. And they make little. It's based on a molecule in your body that I think it's to do with moving oxygen about. I'm not sure. There's some little molecule that your body uses already, and then they can stick. It's very symmetrical in shape, and they can stick 24 spikes onto the same molecule. And all those spikes can be different variants. So in theory, they could have one vaccine with 24 different variants, all studied onto the same little nanoparticle. And so their one is going. It's got SARS. It's got several variants of SARS and several variants of COVID stuck on their nanoparticle. And so they did the animal trials first. They've completed the phase 1 for humans, and they've got the results, and they're going to announce them in the next few days. They're going to announce, but they're saying the human results are encouraging. So that's just phase 1. They'll go on to phase 2 and phase 3. But that's another one that it's very likely that, just given the huge success rate that we have for COVID vaccines, it's pretty likely that that's going to be one of the 100 new vaccines at the end of 2022. A pan-coronavirus vaccine that's already in phase 1. So a pan-coronavirus vaccine means one that works for all the coronaviruses. And there have been little animal trials of these, of lots of multiple coronaviruses. And there have been animal trials of these. And for instance, one trial was studied with spike proteins from SARS, MERS, and COVID-19. And when they tried that with mice, they made antibodies to those 3 coronaviruses, also to one of the common colds. So you might get vaccinated against SARS, MERS, and COVID, and then also some of your colds are gone as well. So and then there's another one which had how many was that? From 8 different coronaviruses onto a protein core, and then these animals generate antibodies that could stick to all 8 of those coronaviruses, and also to 4 other ones that they had not used in the vaccine. So they don't really know why that is. That's a bit like the mysterious copying of the whatever that one, the CG thing or whatever it was. The yeah, it's a bit like the copying of G followed by, which, let's get it the right way around. C followed by G, and U followed by A. So it's a bit like that. That's very slow. So this one, they don't really know why it is that having spikes for 3 coronaviruses leads to an immune response to a 4th one that isn't on the subunit protein particle. But I mean, one hypothesis is that when the immune cell comes and sees this particle with several rather similar spikes on it, instead of developing an individual thing for each one, it kind of generalizes from them and says, oh, those are all the same, all roughly the same. I'll make a general purpose one that'll work for them all. So in all of these things, it's our immune system that is the clever bit, is the really, really clever bit of it. The scientists are ingenious, but our immune system is amazingly far more clever than we are. In how it, just through evolution, it's evolved to be, so we don't know how it does all the things it does. But in this case, somehow or other, our amazing immune system is able to work out a way of, it kind of generalizes from just 3 coronavirus spikes to work out a way of stopping them that also works with other coronaviruses that it's never seen. And it's really quite amazing that based on such limited information, it is able to stop other ones. It's sort of able to look at those 3 different ones and generalize and say, oh, that's this general pattern we've got to stop. And then it can stop other ones. And they don't really know how that works. But again, so that's another amazing vaccine on its way. And then there's another one, and several other ones. Another one was an experimental COVID vaccine in pigs, which protected them from, it was a vaccine against COVID, which they tested in pigs. But it was meant for stopping COVID in humans. But it unexpectedly protected the pigs from the symptoms of PED-V, which is a different coronavirus that kills 1 in 10 pigs. And that's nothing to do with COVID. And so that's experimental COVID vaccine that protected against a completely different vaccine. So who knows? Maybe we'll end up with a pan-coronavirus vaccine that stops the coronavirus colds as well. That's 1 in 4 of the common colds is a coronavirus cold. Maybe it'll stop some of those as well. And so meanwhile, the vaccines we do have do work against Omicron, and especially with booster, and then adding the 4th booster as well, the 3rd booster, and maybe the 4th booster. You know, this completely having more boosters that closer and closer together is, you know, it is a way ahead, but it's not very sustainable. Well, it is possible to do it that way, but what the World Health Organization are looking at is a kind of far more long-term vision, where you don't just keep on having more and more boosters closer and closer together to try and get more and more protection, but you look at it in more fundamental science, and you work out how to really achieve a much stronger response with a 2nd or 3rd generation vaccine, instead of just piling on more and more of the 1st generation vaccine. And now this is just about how we expect most vaccines to pass phase 3. And only one of the 10 abandoned vaccines abandoned phase 1, all except one were abandoned not because they failed, because the leading vaccines are so good they felt they couldn't compete. And one of them was abandoned in phase 3, that's CureVac. But that was only because when they got to that point, they said, oh, well, our one isn't quite up to the standard of the leading ones. And we can we now, based on the information we have so far, we know how to make a new vaccine that will work better with the variants. So let's go back again and start again. So one that was abandoned at phase 3, the only one abandoned in phase 3, was abandoned because they could see a way to make a better vaccine, which they thought would be more competitive. CureVac is the only one that started phase 3 that wasn't approved. This is a really astonishing success rate. So by this time next year, we'll likely have 100 vaccines, including one incredibly low cost, the Hexapro ones, using hen's eggs, and that is likely to be more effective than Pfizer. And then Gritstone Bio, which targets the innards, so it's a much more broad spectrum. We might have a pan-coronavirus, and we'll have vaccines tweaked to variants as well, although we might even need vaccines tweaked to variants if we've got these such good vaccines on their way. And then we also have vaccine hubs. So did I talk about that? Yeah, I'll talk about that now. So the World Health Organization have started their first technology transfer hub in Africa, and that's going to have the mRNA like Moderna. So sadly, Moderna are not transferring their technology to Africa. They made their patent available to weaker economies, but there's far more to making a vaccine than just looking at the patent. And sadly, Moderna are not transferring the knowledge of how to turn that patent into a vaccine. So, but Africa is a good place to do this because many of the patents that you need to make an mRNA vaccine haven't been taken out in Africa. And so they are having to invent their new vaccine from scratch, but based on the Moderna patent, so they know what to make. But they have lots of details to fill in. And they expect by the end of 2022 that they should be able to make a vaccine like the Moderna one. They could do it much faster if Moderna was to transfer their technology, but it doesn't seem likely they will, unless the governments. Now, I mean, personally, I think Moderna was developed with public funding. I think the Western governments should tell Moderna, you've just got to tell Africa how to make that. You know, you're making billions anyway, and they need to know so they can make their vaccines. And they would only be selling their vaccines at low cost in Africa and the weaker economies. They're not even going to be competing with Moderna. I don't think it makes any sense at all on a human level, on any economic or anything, for Moderna to not transfer its technology to Africa. That's my personal view. And the World Health Organization have been saying this for months. They've been saying to the stronger economies, we've got to facilitate a way to transfer some of this technology so that more people can make these excellent vaccines. But anyway, so they will be making they'll be making subunit proteins like Novavax and the mRNA vaccines and the viral vectors. They're going to be teaching the experts in Africa how to make all these things. So transfer technology. And then this hub will then teach other hubs, and so it'll spread out until we've got lots of hubs throughout the world that know how to make all the most advanced vaccines. These vaccines are not that difficult to make. Once you know how to do it, in some ways they're much simpler than the other ways, which can involve having to incubate potentially deadly viruses and things, and are really quite technically quite difficult. And yet, although it's very modern technology, once they know how to do it, they should be able to make many of these things much more easily than other vaccines. So it's actually quite a good technology to transfer to weaker economies, because it's actually an easier process than the traditional vaccines. India makes vaccines, but Africa doesn't, because it's really quite a difficult thing to make, and because of the IP as well. So that's coming along, that we're going to have these vaccine hubs in Africa. We already have many. I mean, Brazil has been making vaccines for a long time, and India has made vaccines for long. India is one of the main vaccine manufacturers in the world. So we have had weaker economies, middle, medium economies, whatever you call them, making vaccines. But we're having even the weakest economies are now making. I mean, South Africa is going to have this vaccine hub, and then there's going to be other ones as well. And so we're looking for a future where we're looking at a future that by the end of 2022, then we will no longer be able to have the vaccine inequity that we have today, because the mRNA vaccines are so flexible, and subunit proteins and the viral vectors, all these methods they've got there with modern technology, will be able to make wide range of vaccines, and Africa will be able to make them. Weaker economies like the weaker economies, Thailand, Vietnam, Brazil, of course. That's all these countries. They're going to be making vaccines much more easily by the end of 2022, and so we're going to have vast numbers of and this is not just for COVID and for Omicron, but also for the other things that there's a big shortage of difficulty of getting vaccines in Africa for many serious diseases that they get there, that we have plenty of vaccines for in the rest of the world. So I think this 2021 is probably the last year when we have such high levels of vaccine inequity. I don't think it's ever going to happen again in any future pandemic. And it's really going to be a big change also for, it's going to lead to possibilities of eliminating various diseases from the world, I believe, that have not been limited so far, mainly because of the difficulty of getting vaccines to everyone. Not vaccine hesitancy so much as just actually producing them. Now, this is about how Omicron might be. There's evidence that Omicron might be specializing in the upper respiratory tract. It's 70 times faster in the upper tract, but it's and 10 times slower in lung tissue. But I mean, we can't count on that, because the thing is, faster in the upper respiratory tract makes sense for the virus, but slower in the lungs doesn't really. So if you can go faster in the lungs as well, then why wouldn't it? So the vaccines don't really know either way which way it's going to go. And so this is the real world evidence that it's much more transmissible, Omicron. It isn't much milder, maybe slightly, but it just seems milder because it's vaccination definitely helps with Omicron. It reduces the severe disease, reduces mild disease and reduces transmission a bit, not much. But it doesn't help as much as with Delta. So we're getting these. So in countries like South Africa, where there's a lot of people, most people in South Africa, 80% or something, have already been infected with beta, and they've had huge deaths. They've had maybe twice the deaths of the UK per million, sadly, and so they've got a high natural immunity. And then in the United Kingdom, where it's going very fast, with a high level of vaccination plus a fair bit of natural immunity. And so the Omicron is spreading through the people with a lot of immunity, whether vaccine or natural, as well as the unvaccinated. But in both these countries, there are not very many of the unvaccinated. Delta is mainly spreading amongst the unvaccinated. So as a result, we get these huge surges in Omicron, much bigger than the surges that is possible with Delta. At least some of the surging is because of that. And so, but those huge numbers amongst the vaccinated and the previously infected tend to be much milder. So that's when all this news about Omicron is much milder. It's only much milder because it's infecting people who wouldn't have been infected with Delta. So it's not really milder than Delta if you get infected when you wouldn't have been with Delta. It's actually, for a vaccinated person, then Omicron is more serious because you can get infected, because you can get sick with it, whereas you wouldn't have got sick with Delta. And so it's actually worse for the vaccinated people, but because it's spreading through vaccinated people, then it's milder overall when you look at the overall figures. And of course it's much less than an unvaccinated person for Delta or Omicron, where Omicron and Delta are about the same. And so this lab work here, it doesn't seem to make much difference to the severity, it being a little bit slower in the lungs. There's not very obvious difference in actual real world data. It doesn't seem so far to be making a huge difference there. But it does mean that these big surges that we have coming along, at least in countries that are well vaccinated or in countries that have previously been exposed, then they're going to have less deaths and less hospitalizations because they're surging amongst people who've got some protection already. So, but still, when you've got such a huge surge, you may be 1 million a day in the UK before the end of the year, then, and indeed, 10% of people in London currently are infected with COVID, according to the latest serological survey. That's built up over the last couple of weeks or something. Big, huge jump up. And so, so it's getting to lots of people, but most of those people will be vaccinated or previously infected, and that's why it's not leading. It's probably not going to lead to such a huge surge in hospitalizations and deaths, and that's the hope. But we can't count it to evolve to become mild, because it could become more serious, because higher loads are often associated with more severe disease. It could become milder because this infecting the nose is a better way of spreading out to others. But and as far as infecting the lungs, it sort of doesn't matter either way for the virus, because infecting the lungs isn't necessarily going to help it to infect other people. So you can see why it's sort of a bit of a, maybe if it doesn't infect the lungs, well, it's still infecting in the upper respiratory tract, then it's not going to get very much infection from infecting the lungs. But on the other hand, there's no real downside to the virus for infecting the lungs either, if it can do that. So, so it's kind of random which way it's going to evolve, and we just can't predict how it's going to evolve. But we can make it mild, and so that's the point. We all have our parts to play, and Omicron is not the last variant. It's going to evolve to new variants, and indeed it's got so many there are indeed 3 major subvariants of Omicron already, and last time I checked, and then loads and loads of minor variants within those subvariants. So it's already splitting into different subvariants, and over time, one of those will become the dominant subvariant. And so it's going to keep on evolving, and we're going to have more and more variants coming along. So we need to slow down this. The more we can take the heat off that, the easier it gets, the quicker we can end it. So we are going to end it eventually with things like pan-coronavirus vaccines, and and it might even be that by slowing it down we speed up the ending by a few months, but that's still worth doing. So the more we slow it down, the faster we can end it, because it means we have less variants coming along, new variants coming along, we have less unknowns to deal with, and our science can work faster. The things we've already discovered can work faster to stop it. And so we have our marvelous science and therapeutics will win out in the end, but we can, by all doing our part, we can help them to win faster. So by this I'm encouraging all of you. And then once so you probably all know what to do. You've probably seen the cheese model. Do have a look at it if you haven't. And that we need all these layers. We need to do it all. The vaccine is just one layer. It's got holes in it. All the layers have holes in them. And so we also need to do things like the quarantine and isolation is still important. And the surface cleaning, physical distancing, avoid touching your face, mask. And then here we've got mask padding cans, lockdown, school and workplace closure and so on. That's one of the kind of last resort thing. If you can get as many as possible of these other layers working well, then you have much less risk of using those ones. So do all of this, and you get less, and you have less. We likely still have some restrictions, because it's I'm in Scotland, and Scotland has already started restrictions on. We've got a maximum of 3 households meeting for Christmas in Scotland, I think it is, and that it's not actually law. It's recommended, strongly recommended, to have maximum of 3. So you may well get restrictions like that in the coming months, because it's surging and it's going to cause problems, and we can reduce those problems by taking these various measures. But then, as we do all that, we can then get to it does that sometimes. I just made that quirk. So I'll go down to the end. That's all that. Well, let's talk a bit about that since it's opened up. This shows what a huge difference the vaccines made to deaths. This is UK, same cases, and look at the difference in the deaths. deaths without vaccination. This is in Florida, sorry, and deaths with vaccination. That's deaths in the UK, sorry, and this is deaths with Florida, where there's very low levels of vaccination. So compare that with the deaths in the UK, and how big difference with two waves, and almost no difference in Florida, a little bit of a difference. And these are various things. You can see how some of them just almost nothing. No, the red is it's scaled. It's different scale for the deaths and for the cases. And so you can see, yes. So just to make sure that doesn't mean there's many deaths as there are cases in Florida. They've got different axes. There's a different number for there than there is for that at the same level. Anyway, you can go and read that if you want to look about it. And then this gives a rough idea about how the vaccines have made it much less lethal. Like an 80-year-old has reduced down to the equivalent of a 50-year-old in the lethality of the vaccine, with the vaccine. Anyway, I'll keep on going down. Right, here we go. So I'm going to talk about how Brazil vaccinated, June 1980, Brazil vaccinated a quarter of the Brazilian, just short of a quarter of the entire Brazilian population in one day. So in UK we're kind of patting ourselves on the back and saying we are vaccinating 1 million people a day. But compared to our population, then we'd have to vaccinate 15 times faster than that to reach what Brazil managed in June 1980. So we have got quite a bit of way to go. And Bhutan vaccinates the entire adult population in 11 days, which is much to the same level as Israel. So it doesn't necessarily need to people sometimes think, oh, weaker economies, the stronger economies could be much faster at vaccinating. It's actually not true. Brazil is not. It's got many difficulties. That includes going way out to places in the rainforest and so on, where you need to go out with the helicopter or whatever to get the vaccines out there. In Bhutan, they had to carry the vaccines up mountains and so on the backs and things. That's up at the top of a mountain, and halfway up a mountain and so on. And 50% rural, and rivers to cross, which maybe not always proper bridges and so on, yet they still managed it. So we have these marvellous vaccines coming along. We're going to have the vaccine capacities going up hugely already. And I think we're already doing however many it is a month. It's 1 billion a month, it might be more than that now. And then next year we will have these, probably not well before the end of next year, maybe, I'm not sure when we'll get these hen's egg vaccines. They seem pretty likely to be approved at some point. Then those be much easier to make, much faster, much more stable, easier to transmit, take around. We'll have Chordogenics, and they might go through their phase 3 quite quickly. They've already gone phase 1 and phase 2, so they're going to be on to phase 3 quite soon. So maybe even the first quarter of 2022, we'll have this nasal spray vaccine that using these very lazy viruses that can't do anything to you because they're just so very slow and lazy. And so many changes that they can't just mutate back to the serious virus. It'd be just beyond possibility to do that. So they're very safe. And so we might have that nasal spray later. Then we'll later on in 2022, we very likely have the Army, the US Army's vaccine to vaccinate or other pan-coronavirus vaccines. We'll likely have those. Then we'll be getting vaccinated against COVID, SARS, MERS, and maybe the common colds as well, who knows? Or maybe or some of them anyway. We might well find that some of our common colds are dealt with as well with the same vaccine. And so we have all that coming, and then we do have the possibility of greatly increasing our ability to vaccinate than even what we think is very fast now. And so we can get these vaccines very fast out to people so they're protected, and then these vaccines should be long duration vaccines as they get to the higher, and then they could be very effective. And if we get a 95% effective vaccine, against COVID, at stopping transmission, then it becomes possible to eliminate it with vaccine alone. Remember, China, Taiwan, Tonga and Bhutan, they've all kept COVID out. So that's 4 countries. China, Taiwan, Tonga and Bhutan are the ones left. After New Zealand and Australia, they let it in. But the others just said, oh, we're not going to let it in. And they went the other way, and they went very, very hard when they started to get cases again. And so it can be stopped even without a vaccine. So if you combine having a vaccine, maybe a 95% effective vaccine, and then if you go in very hard whenever you have a small outbreak, and it doesn't jump often from animals to humans, because China's never seen it jump to humans again since the original outbreak. So it does have animal reservoirs, but it's not very easy for it to jump from animals to humans, at least so far. So it is possible to eliminate it. It could be added to one of many eliminable vaccines. Anyway, meanwhile, this is what you have to do. You have to get vaccinated when it's your turn, keep a safe distance, wear a well-fitting mask. If you get an FFP2 or 3 or N94, make sure it fits very well. Open windows and ventilation, wash your hands often. So they're still doing research. It could be, for instance, that Omicron can be spread by surfaces more than Delta, they don't know. So it's certainly worth continuing with the hand hygiene. It's very difficult to disentangle, because if it does last from surfaces, it doesn't seem to last very long. So in situations where you could be contaminated by your hands, you could also be contaminated by breathing and by the droplets. So it's very hard to disentangle transmission via the air and transmission via droplets and transmission via surfaces. So best to do everything. And then this is a Science and 5 thing, and I recommend watching that video. And okay, I think that's it. I'm finished now. So hopefully that helps you be a little bit more positive about the future. And but this is the most important thing what we have to do for now. So do be very careful. And if you get it, and just one basic thing, that if you get it over Christmas, then do isolate away from the rest of your household if you can. And that's especially important if you're vaccinated. Then you get the symptoms. If you're vaccinated, then the symptoms come much early on in the progression of the virus. You've got very little virus left in your body yet. That's why people who are vaccinated, often when they test for COVID, they test negative. So you have to wait and try again a bit later once your symptoms have developed quite away, and then try again. Because when you first test, your body, you see, has been keyed up by the vaccine. So it recognizes it very, very early on. And so it does an immune response with the fever and aches and pains and so on. It does all that very, very quickly when you've got very little virus. So especially if you're vaccinated, you start getting symptoms of COVID, if you isolate at that point away from the rest of your household, it's very likely you haven't passed it on to anyone yet, because you react so quickly as a vaccinated person, and you probably haven't got enough virus to infect anyone at that point. And so if you're vaccinated and you get COVID symptoms, and even if you don't test positive, you may still have it. Still isolate away. If you have if you want to be super careful, and I really do recommend that, especially over Christmas, and there's so much Omicron around now, that if you get cold-like symptoms, it's very likely it's Omicron rather than the common cold. So I'd say treat. If I was I'm self-isolating basically. I'm not connecting in real world with anyone over Christmas. But if I was, and if I've got even the slightest symptoms of a cold, then I would isolate to a separate room if there's a room available, and I would ask people to bring in my meals to the door, and as far as possible not leave the room, and try and keep the virus from spreading. Because because I'm double dose vaccinated and boosted, so if I get COVID symptoms, it's incredibly unlikely that I am infectious at that point. And so if I go and isolate immediately as soon as I get symptoms, it's very, very likely that I won't give it to anyone. And I don't know why this isn't said more. And so it doesn't matter, even if everyone else in your house is vaccinated, even if none of them are particularly elderly, you still don't want to give them COVID. So if you can, isolate to your room and wear a mask whenever you're interacting with anyone else. And in that way, over Christmas, then even if one of you does get COVID, you may very well be able to stop it getting to everyone else. And so few people know that, or seem to know that. So anyway, that's my last point. And then, so anyway, I'll leave it at that. So again, wish you all a merry and a very safe, do stay safe over Christmas. And if any of you are getting COVID, I do hope you get it mild, and do watch out for, there's breathlessness is the main thing to look out for, and many people get a good quality oximeter to keep an. I'll put a link on that. Doctors often recommend that. I'll put a link on that in the end of this. I'll just mention that section as well, because that's the main thing. That there isn't much they can do to treat the mild disease at home. Or you can take things to relieve the symptoms, but basically just your body has to fight it by itself. There's very little they can do except these new pills, which are only going to be for people who have a very high risk. And but if you start getting breathless, or your oxygen levels in your blood start going down significantly, at that point there's nothing you can do at home to improve on what your body itself is doing, but the doctors can do a huge amount. So if you get any of the symptoms of breathlessness, look up the serious symptoms of COVID that mean that you need to contact emergency, and the ones that mean you need to contact a doctor. If you get those symptoms, then do exactly as they advise you to do, because that's the main risk. And if you then get treated for oxygen, then especially if you've been vaccinated, especially if you get treated early, then they've got very good prognosis nowadays, especially if you're vaccinated. They know how to treat it. So yeah, okay, so that's it. I'll upload this to my channel now.